Have you ever heard of Patty Hearst? Back in the 1970s, she was a wealthy heiress who was kidnapped by a radical group called the Symbionese Liberation Army. What started out as a hostage situation turned into something far stranger. Over time, Hearst was indoctrinated, publicly adopted the group's ideology, and even took part in their crimes. The story exploded into headlines, courtrooms, books, documentaries, and movies, becoming one of the most unsettling real world examples of radicalization and identity transformation ever recorded. That being said, as a kid who grew up in the 80s, I'd argue Patty Hearst's story didn't leave its greatest mark on Hollywood or true crime paperbacks. As far as I'm concerned, it lived on as the inspiration behind the creation of one of the most iconic villainesses of the decade. When G.I. Joe was reborn in 1982, there was a lot to like about our little squad of real American heroes. Sure, at first glance, they were mostly just Green Army men, but look a little closer and you'd spot the details. Bright red pads, camo patterns, ammo belts slung across chests, little touches that gave each soldier some personality, some individuality. The bad guys, though, not so much. Cobra was basically a couple of blue dudes in black masks, led by a slightly lighter blue dude with a shiny, faceless chrome helmet. And that was a problem, especially for Larry Hama, the poor guy tasked with turning what was essentially a printed comic book, into something that actually told stories. Hama wasn't about to phone it in with cookie-cutter villains. As a traditional writer, he wanted characters who could emote, react, and feel real. But when he started working on G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero #1 for Marvel, not a single Cobra had an exposed face, which made dramatic storytelling kind of impossible. So he went to artist Herb Trimp and basically said Cobra needed a face. And in what I can only assume was a very dude-brained moment, suggested that face should be a hot babe. Of course, since girls weren't exactly considered marketable to boys back then, the solution was obvious. Dress her in black leather, because, well, who wouldn't want a hot babe in black leather? His words, not mine. Unfortunately, that master plan hit a snag for practical reasons. Early Marvel coloring was cheap, limited, and absolutely not a fan of black ink. Big black areas swallowed line art, flattened details, and reproduced like garbage on paper. Editors and colorists avoided heavy black areas like the plague, even when they came in shapes of sexy villains. And so, Baroness 1.0 made her debut in G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero #1, wearing blue. Still, she made one hell of a first impression during Cobra's opening gambit against the Joes, Operation Lady Doomsday. Disguised as a journalist, the Baroness abducts top nuclear physicist Dr. Adele Burkhart and delivers her straight to Cobra's island base. The Joes manage to rescue the scientist, of course, and blow up the fortress, but the Baroness escapes alongside Cobra Commander, taking with her a far more valuable prize, our collective hearts. Right out of the gate, she's established as a survivor, a strategist, and a major player within Cobra's leadership, quickly becoming a favorite not just with the fans but with Hasbro themselves. Before long, she was fast-tracked for plastic immortality, making her one of the rare characters who hit big across comics and cartoons without having an action figure. She debuted in the very first animated miniseries, The Mass Device, where we first heard her speak, in that now iconic, vaguely Eastern European or continental accent, voiced by Morgan Lofting, may she rest in peace. Interestingly, that wasn't the original plan, since Larry Hama's early inspiration for the Baroness was real-life American heiress turned terrorist Patty Hearst. But back to the toy. Thankfully for us, toy production had zero issues with black paint. But things get a little murky here though. Interestingly, early figure sketches had the Baroness wearing a headband rather than her iconic glasses. According to designer Ron Rudat, those were added by him to make her look more educated. That said, she clearly had the glasses long before the toy designs kicked off. Either way, Rudat does deserve credit for locking in the rest of her look. Black leather, battle armor, high-heeled boots, gloves, and the Cobra logo front and center on her chest, making for one hell of an action figure that thankfully still had her long flowing black hair, since one of the great tragedies of female action figures back then was chopping the hair short to preserve head articulation. Which is why I love this figure. For the hair, I mean, not the, sexy outfit. Seriously, as a kid, that whole black leather Batgirl mystique completely flew over my innocent little head. And honestly, I thought her accent in the cartoon sounded weird. It wouldn't be until years later, as an adult, that I finally got it and started to understand the allure of her look. Anyway, speaking of the cartoon, let's start our Baroness story there, because honestly, it's the cleanest and most straightforward version of the character. From her very first appearance, she's basically a fixture in the series. Initially, Cobra's master of disguise, at least until a certain Z-themed family showed up and took over that department. The Baroness also forms one half of the most famous power couples in Cobra history, with the weapons manufacturer Destro, with just a hint of Flint on the side. Kidding. Mostly. We'll definitely come back to that relationship later. And by that, I mean Destro, not the Joe Warrant officer. If we're talking Baroness highlights in the cartoon, I've got 3. First up is the Spell of the Siren, where she gets her hands on a mystical conch shell that hypnotizes men with a siren's song, promptly mind controls most of the male G.I. Joe and Cobra forces, including the commander himself, and briefly takes over Cobra alongside Destro. As expected, her reign doesn't last, but it's a great early glimpse of the Baroness as more than just muscle or eye candy, and it quietly foreshadows where the character would go in later comics, which we will get to. Next is Worlds Without End, where we meet a Baroness from an alternate reality where Cobra has won. But in this world, she's secretly fighting against them as a double agent, and one of the very few Joes still alive. Sadly, that's not something we can say for her lover in this reality, the Joe Stealer. Fortunately, the Stealer from our main universe is zapped into her universe, and along with a couple of his OG-13 mates, Clutch and Grunt, decides to stay with her and join her in her fight. And in Stealer's case, I guess, join her in bed too. Finally, in the Deke continuation, starting with Operation Dragonfire, things get messy. After being dumped by Destro in favor of Zarana, the Baroness teams up with the Dreadnought Nogahai to restore Cobra Commander, who was once a man thanks to the events of the 1987 movie, back to human form using Dragonfire energy, and a quite awesome looking deer skull helmet. Anyway, once that's done, she helps him overthrow Serpentor and reclaim Cobra. And with that, Destro readily and literally dumps Zarana to get back into the good graces of the Baroness, who has firmly aligned herself with Cobra Commander. Later animated appearances worth mentioning include G.I. Joe Resolute, where she and Destro are involved in a scientist hostage subplot before getting taken down by Roadblock, Gung-Ho, Beachhead, and Stalker. And G.I. Joe Renegades, where she's reimagined as Cobra Commander's second-in-command and the public face of Cobra itself, now hiding its evil intentions as a slick pharmaceuticals company. Talk about bad medicine. But as fun as the Baroness was in animation, it's really in the comics where the real meat and potatoes of her story get laid out, starting, of course, with Larry Hama's original Marvel run. Her story begins as Anastasia Sisarovna, born in Europe in the 1950s. Well, let's not be rude and start revealing a lady's age, shall we? Anastasia grew up wealthy, aristocratic, and thoroughly indulged, but that privilege didn't spare her from tragedy. During the Vietnam War, her older brother Eugene brought a 15-year-old Anastasia along on what was supposed to be a humanitarian mission to Saigon, distributing medical supplies to civilians. Things went downhill fast. Eugene's South Vietnamese contacts turned out to be Viet Cong soldiers who murdered him, and would have likely killed Anastasia too if she had not been hidden away in an office. She never actually saw her brother die or the Viet Cong get killed by an intervening American soldier. All she saw was the aftermath, that soldier standing over the bodies, and she was pulled out before the truth could be explained. leading her to blame the US military for the death of her brother. That moment hardened her. It left her angry, disillusioned, and carrying a deep, permanent hatred of American military power. In the years that followed, Anastasia became a radical student activist, then an international terrorist, and by the early 80s, she'd caught the attention of a certain ruthless terrorist organization determined to rule the world, and was recruited into Cobra Command, where she took on the name of the Baroness and quickly rose through the ranks to become one of Cobra Commander's most trusted lieutenants and a central figure within the organization. And it's also where the Baroness meets world-class arms dealer Destro, who, unbeknownst to her, she'd already crossed paths with years earlier. But once again, we'll get to that later. What starts off as a strictly professional relationship between the Baroness and Destro immediately becomes something more, growing organically out of their shared interest of practicing the clarinet. Just kidding. Their shared contempt for Cobra Commander and his leadership. And that bond is clearly shown when Cobra Commander secretly hires the mercenary, Major Blood, to assassinate Destro during a battle. Granted, it was probably in the heat of the moment, but the Baroness intervenes in dramatic fashion, spoiling Blood's shot by swerving her Hiss tank to save him, only to crash, trapping herself inside as it explodes, nearly killing her in the process. Despite suffering horrific burns all over her body, the Baroness somehow survives, against all odds, and apparently, so does her long black hair. Every single strand. Shout out to viewer Brittany Becker who pointed out that rather odd detail, which I never realized until then. Anyway, she's taken into Joe custody only to be ironically rescued by Major Blood, who whisks her off to the Bern Institute of Reconstructive Surgery in Switzerland. There, an absurdly talented Dr. Huntkinder doesn't just heal her, he completely restores her to full bad girl glory. The Baroness makes a triumphant return, now back in black, rejoining the fight against G.I. Joe and, more importantly, maneuvering within Cobra's own political mess. She bides her time for an opening against Cobra Commander, then later against Cobra's Emperor, Serpentor. And eventually that opening finally comes in the form of a Crimson Guardsman named Fred, the Seventh, who arrives posing as Cobra Commander himself. But being one of the very few who had actually seen the Commander unmasked, the Baroness is called to verify his claim, and spotting the angle immediately, the Baroness helps him maintain the deception, and together they move against Serpentor, igniting a full-blown Cobra civil war, which leads to her getting captured and famously strapped to the hood of Serpentor's Hiss tank. And if I were the Baroness, I'd just stay far away from Cobra Hiss tanks altogether. In the end, Serpentor falls, and the Baroness is rescued by none other than Destro, who shows up with his shiny new army of Iron Grenadiers to, flex his dick and whisk his lady off to safety. A lot of whisking going on. Anyway, after all that Cobra Civil War nonsense, Destro and the Baroness decide they're done. Finito. Retired. They retreat to Castle Destro in Scotland to leave the madness behind. Until Fred Mander launches an all-out assault on the castle to wipe out his enemies. So much for gratitude after helping him pull off the biggest identity scam in Cobra history. But Destro, being Destro, flips the situation, captures the fake commander, and effectively takes control of Cobra himself. And with that, the Baroness is reassigned to run the Cobra consulate in New York, paired with her classic frenemy, Zarana. And yeah, that partnership goes about as well as you'd expect, with the Baroness getting kicked out of the side door of a Cobra helicopter mid-flight by her partner. She survives only by grabbing onto one of the landing wheels as the chopper touches down on top of the consulate. Totally normal workday at Cobra. Meanwhile, remember that miracle-working Swiss doctor, Dr. Huntkinder? Well, he gets a new patient, a badly scarred American soldier, accompanied by his red-haired girlfriend. Sound familiar? When the soldier shows Huntkinder a photo of his face before the injury, the doctor immediately recognizes him as the same man from the Baroness's past, and quietly alerts her via fax. Which, isn't that very quiet to begin with, but I digress. So much for patient doctor confidentiality. I guess all bets are off when black leather is involved. The Baroness realizes that the man she's believed to be her brother's murderer all these years is apparently Snake Eyes. And so she immediately flies off to the land of world-class chocolates and goes on a full unhinged rampage through the Byrne Institute, shooting Scarlet in the head, the Ori kitty she lives, and abducting Snake Eyes, dragging him back to the New York consulate to be tortured by the Payne brothers. Snake Eyes naturally wrecks them and steals their clothes, thus giving us Snake Eyes version 3.0, and escapes into the consulate proper. In the climax, the building collapses around the Baroness and she's saved at the last second by Snake Eyes himself. Still consumed by hatred, she pulls a gun on him until Destro arrives again and finally tells her the truth. So, years earlier in Vietnam, he and his father were actually at the scene investigating the incident. And as a ballistics expert, Destro Sr. confirmed that it was impossible for Eugene, wearing a bulletproof vest, to have been killed by Snake Eyes, who was armed only with a pistol. The fatal shots came from AK-47s, fired by the Viet Cong. So yeah, turns out Snake Eyes wasn't her brother's killer. He was the man who actually saved her. The revelation completely shatters her and she leaves Cobra once again alongside Destro. James and Anastasia walk away together. Until the real Cobra Commander returns, eliminates the imposter Fred and his inner circle, captures the Baroness, and subjects her repeatedly to the brainwave scanner, reprogramming her and forcing her back into Cobra, where she tragically remains until the end of the Marvel run. And while you could say that the next publisher, Devil's Due, technically continued this Baroness's story, throwing in a little extra Destro family drama involving his apparent illegitimate son Alexander and a new rival in the form of his lover, Mistress Armada. But all of that was eventually declared non-canon when the franchise transferred to IDW, who went with a two-pronged approach. Larry Hama returned to officially continue his original Marvel storyline, and IDW launched its own separate universe with their own take on the Baroness. And honestly, it wasn't that far off from the Marvel version because, let's be real, how exactly do you improve on leather-clad perfection? And speaking of perfection, you want to know the perfect way to help me and my channel out? Aside from likes, comments, shares, and subs, it's honestly just watching the videos. If you're enjoying this one, when it's done, click on another, and then another, and maybe another after that. You get the idea. Extended watch time is what really makes the almighty YouTube algorithm excited. So if you've got the time, let it roll, or just keep me playing in the background while you go about your day. Either way, it helps more than you'd think. So yeah, in advance, thank you. Okay, fine. If you ask me, IDW's take on the Baroness was a little more hard-edged, more hardcore, and she gets a far more interesting endgame. This time around, she's born Anastasia de Cobra, again into an aristocratic Eastern European family, raised amid wealth, rigid tradition, and good old-fashioned patriarchal control. She still has a brother who also dies under far less traumatizing circumstances, leaving her as the sole heir, and prompting her father to tighten his grip even further, going so far as to arrange her marriage without her consent. Anastasia rejects all of it. She flees to Rome and aligns herself with a dude named Umberto Gaspare, leader of the radical revolutionary group known as the Red Hand. Under Gaspare's influence, she trains in insurgency and violence, embracing revolution not as an escape, but as a way to seize power. That transformation culminates in her most decisive act, detonating explosives at the de Cobra estate during a gathering of aristocrats, killing her parents and wiping her former life off the map. And from there, Anastasia operates globally as a mercenary, trainer, and assassin. Until once again, her reputation draws the attention of Cobra. Recruited into their intelligence apparatus, she takes on the codename the Baroness. Oh, and she also manages to track down Umberto and kill him. Inside Cobra, she crosses paths with a pre-metalhead Destro yet again, But unlike the Marvel run, there's no romance here. She doesn't fall for him. She tries to kill him. Viewing Destro as a rival, she eagerly carries out an order to assassinate him. But after a failed attempt at Castle Destro thanks to Clyde the dog, rest in peace, they enter into a purely adversarial and transactional relationship built on leverage and not trust. And when the current Cobra Commander is, spoiler, killed, the Baroness is named by the mysterious Cobra Council as one of the candidates to replace him. Quick aside, in the IDW universe, Cobra Commander is not the single guy, but rather a title passed down through history. And while she doesn't ultimately win the position, she does complete the mission assigned to her by the new commander, some dude named Craig, systematically eliminating the Cobra Council, traveling all around the world, executing its members one by one, proving herself as Cobra's most effective and ruthless operator. Unfortunately, despite all of IDW's hype placed behind the new commander, Craig kind of falls flat with the fans, much like Serpentor before him. And honestly, IDW's whole G.I. Joe universe sort of ran out of steam around the same time. And so after a soft reboot that collapses Cobra's existing power structure and conveniently forgets all about Craig, a new leader rises to the top surrounded by her loyal subjects and inner circle. Yeah, you guessed it! The Baroness finally achieves her ultimate goal, stepping into the role of Cobra Commander herself. But as surprising as that turn of events was for the Baroness, believe it or not, it's not what I would consider the most shocking reinterpretation of the character. And before anyone asks, no, I am not talking about the live-action version of the Baroness. You know, the one where she's suddenly Anna Lewis, played by Sienna Miller, lover of Duke, and sister to his best friend, Rex, who then becomes Cobra Commander, brainwashes her with nanomites, turning her into the Baroness, only for her to eventually break free, reunite with Duke, switch sides, and help defeat Cobra Commander. Although, honestly, that's actually not far off from where I'm going. Because the most surprising treatment of Baroness, at least to me, comes from the current Energon Universe published by Skybound Entertainment, where the Baroness isn't just a redeemed character, she's a full-fledged member of G.I. Joe. But let's rewind for a little bit more context. So, thankfully she's back to Anastasia Sisarovna, and once again an aristocrat bored by privilege who deliberately chose danger, training with an Eastern European intelligence agency before reinventing herself as a freelance terrorist whose reputation earns her the name of the Baroness, and a target on her back by G.I. Joe. She's eventually captured and held prisoner in the pit, where she exploits a siege by Major Blood to escape, taking out his eye in the process, before briefly turning on Duke and vanishing. Rather than writing her off though, Duke recruits her over Hawk's objections, seeing her as a necessary destabilizer, forcing the Baroness into an uneasy Yo Joe era, marked by mistrust and moments of brutal competence that saves lives anyway. And as Cobra slowly emerges, she proves invaluable against threats like the Crimson Guard, Tomax and Xamot, and Destro himself, remaining defiant even under capture and torture, and ultimately choosing to go back to Duke and the Joes when she could have walked away. Her most personal trial comes in Paris when Major Blood returns and engineers an ambush to exact revenge, kidnapping her and CoverGirl and forcing a sadistic game that ends with the Baroness outsmarting Blood and then proceeding to take out his other eye. Admittedly, the whole Energon universe is still pretty new, and it's hard to tell if this current arrangement will remain the status quo. That being said, I'm quite enjoying this fresh new take on the Baroness, so I'm pretty much along for the ride. Yo, Joe. And speaking of rides, let's finish things off by taking a quick ride down memory lane to check out the other notable Baroness action figures that followed the original 1984 release, which shockingly was the only Baroness figure we got during the entire original Real American Hero run from 82 to 93. That same figure, however, kept popping back up during what I like to call the dark ages of G.I. Joe, the late 90s to early 2000s era of well-meaning but mostly unsuccessful revival attempts. During that stretch, we got the same Baroness figure in blue, in red, and as well as one not named the Baroness. Wait, what? Allow me to explain. Turns out at some point Hasbro actually lost the rights to the name the Baroness. So in the year 2000, they reissued the exact same figure as a brand new character named Chameleon, retroactively explained as the Baroness's illegitimate half-sister. Thankfully, she wasn't quite as ruthless or cold-blooded. In fact, she set off to thwart the evil actions of her spoiled sister by offering her services to G.I. Joe, undergoing extensive plastic surgery in order to go undercover as a secret agent impersonating the Baroness, who was conveniently sidelined due to massive burns caused by a his tank explosion. And in a nice bit of franchise self-awareness, IDW later folded this oddball piece of toy lore into their continuity, introducing their own Baroness half-sibling, Erica Letienne, who starts out with Cobra, defects to the Joes, and ultimately adopts the codename Chameleon. Anyway, after a few more oddly proportioned and mostly forgettable figures, the Baroness finally returned back into the spotlight as part of the first Cobra box set celebrating the 25th anniversary of a real American hero. Oh, okay, fine, this one wasn't that great either. And neither was the slightly retooled blue version that was supposed to homage her early cartoon and comic look. Thankfully, Hasbro course corrected pretty quickly with a slightly better figure in 2009. We also got a Diver Baroness and a couple of live-action movie versions that were fine, as long as you kept the shades on. Yeesh. And before the 1/18th scale Joe line eventually ended, Hasbro managed to squeeze in a few more, including a resolute Baroness with a head so big that not even her oddly shaped shades could save her. And then at last, the previously released 2009 version with a much improved head that was unfortunately locked behind an SDCC 2013 exclusive box set. Boo! And just to twist the knife in a little bit more and add more salt to the wound, she came with a robotic panther accessory clearly meant to be Ravage, the Decepticon intelligence courier. Double boo. Thankfully, that wasn't the end of the Baroness's story. In 2020, she finally made the jump to 6-inch scale with her G.I. Joe classified debut, complete with a slick, red coil motorcycle. The following year brought us another live-action Baroness, and if you're thinking, this doesn't really look like Sienna Miller, you'd be correct. This one's based on Ursula Corbero, the actress who played the Baroness from the Snake Eyes origin movie, which we really don't need to acknowledge ever happened. Moving on. For those of us who weren't really exactly into motorcycles, 2022 gave us a nice back-to-basics retro-carded Baroness, and a Crimson Strike version in 2023. And in 2024, we got an awesome Pilot Baroness as a tier for the HasLab Rattler. But as solid as all these classified releases are, none of them are actually my favorite when it comes to a larger scaled Baroness. That honor goes to Super 7, who dropped not one, but two Baroness figures in their 7-inch Ultimates line. The first was a straight-up plastic translation of the original blue look. Cool, but I ultimately passed on because, like most people, I prefer my Baroness in black leather, or in this case, gray. And look, I'll be the first to admit that Super 7's Ultimates line is absolutely riddled with flaws and the occasional outright stinker. But this Baroness, with the subtle smirk and windswept hair, this one right here is the ultimate Baroness currently living on my shelf. And speaking of hair, are you familiar with the Joe who has no problem with the wind sweeping his? Well, that would be the heavy machine gunner turned ninja commando, Roadblock. Wait, what? If you want to know how that happened, you can check out his story here. Or if you want my latest story, you can find that over here. Either way, thanks for watching, and I hope to hear from you in the comments below. Are you a fan of hot babes in black leather? Go ahead and tell me your story.